Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us. And today we're going to be tackling something that I think is super important in life, and that is anxiety and depression, and how faith can help you through that.
Okay.
We're looking at this through the lens of a podcast and a book, both called Breaking Free. And they both offer a really interesting Christian perspective on these challenges.
Yeah, you know what I think is so interesting about the Breaking Free material is just how they just acknowledge right off the bat that anxiety and depression aren't things that you can just kind of like shrug off.
Right.
It's not like, oh, just get over it. Like
Yeah.
they really hit home that these are serious conditions.
Yeah, one of the hosts, Sarah, she even shares her own experience with anxiety, and she describes it as this like dark cloud that follows you everywhere.
Oh, wow.
And then they compare depression to like carrying this heavy weight. And I think a lot of people listening can relate to those feelings.
Absolutely. And you know what else is interesting is that they stress that, battling these conditions doesn't mean that your faith is weak. In fact, they even point out that like big biblical figures like Elijah and David, they went through periods of like intense despair.
Yeah, it's so true. It makes you realize that it's part of the human experience.
Right.
Even for those people that we see as like larger than life.
Yeah.
But then the question becomes like, if even like the most faithful people struggle with this, where do we turn for support? And Breaking Free suggests that a foundation can be found in God's promises.
Right. And they really emphasize this verse, 1 Peter 5:7, which says, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. So, instead of trying to like shoulder all your burdens on your own,
Right.
they suggest like, trying to hand them off to a higher power.
Yeah, like handing off that heavy backpack.
Exactly.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
It's not about ignoring the worries, but it's about acknowledging that you don't have to carry it all by yourself. But how do you actually cast your cares? How do you do that?
Well, they point to Philippians 4:6-7, which really emphasizes the power of prayer and gratitude.
Oh.
And they argue that, shifting your focus from what's stressing you out to God's promises can really like bring a sense of peace.
Okay, so releasing burdens and shifting your focus. It makes you wonder what's going on psychologically when we actually engage in things like prayer and gratitude.
That's where it gets really interesting because like studies have shown that like practicing gratitude can lead to some real benefits.
Wow.
Like better sleep, increased happiness, even like improvements in physical health.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and the science behind prayer is still being like explored.
Right.
But a lot of people find comfort in like connecting with, something beyond themselves.
Yeah, it's amazing how these practices that have been around for centuries
Yeah.
are now being backed up by modern research. It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
But Breaking Free doesn't stop at just prayer and gratitude.
Right there.
They also really emphasize the need to be honest about your struggles,
Yeah.
both with yourself and with God. And they present vulnerability as a strength and not a weakness. And I think that's such a refreshing perspective.
Yeah.
Because so often people avoid seeking help
Yeah.
or even admitting that they're struggling because of shame or stigma. And Breaking Free is really encouraging listeners to be open,
Yes.
arguing that, this honesty is actually the first step towards healing.
Yeah. And it can be so hard to do that.
Yeah, it can be so hard.
But they present it as such a powerful step.
Yeah. So acknowledging your struggles and seeking support from a higher power, it's like a two-pronged approach to finding peace.
Yeah.
But what does that support look like in everyday life? Like, what are they suggesting people actually do?
Well, one of the practical takeaways is to find like healthy ways to cope with stress.
Okay.
So that could be, spending time in nature,
Yeah.
being creative,
Right.
or even just taking breaks when you need them.
Yeah.
They emphasize that like caring for your physical and emotional well-being is so crucial for spiritual well-being too.
Yeah. So it's about taking practical steps rather than just hoping for the best.
Sure.
It seems like they're advocating for a much more proactive approach to faith.
I think so.
But I'm curious, what are some specific things people can do to cultivate gratitude, especially when they're feeling anxious or depressed?
So imagine you're feeling totally overwhelmed with anxiety, right? Instead of dwelling on that worry, just take a minute to notice something that you're grateful for.
Okay.
Maybe it's a sunny day, a supportive friend, a good cup of coffee.
Right.
And these small acts of gratitude can just shift your perspective, even if it's just for a moment.
It's about finding those little sparks of joy.
Exactly.
Like those little reminders that even when things are tough, there's still good in the world.
Yeah, and it's not about like denying the negative emotions.
Yeah.
It's about making space for the positive ones to exist alongside them.
Alongside those small acts of gratitude, breaking free also encourages listeners to turn to prayer as a means of connecting with God and finding comfort.
Yeah.
They suggest bringing those anxieties and worries directly to God, trusting in His care and guidance. It's interesting how, in a way, the very act of prayer can be like a form of letting go, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's a way of acknowledging that you don't have to carry everything on your own.
Right.
There's a power greater than yourself that you can lean on.
It sounds like they're advocating for this balanced approach, combining personal action with reliance on a higher power.
Yeah.
It's not about just passively hoping that things get better.
Yeah.
It's about actively participating in your own healing.
Right, and taking those steps.
But it also seems like breaking free isn't just about individual effort.
Right.
They also highlight the importance of community and support.
Yeah. They encourage listeners to connect with others who understand their experience.
Okay.
So this could be through support groups, faith communities, or simply confiding in trusted friends and family.
Right. It's that old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved.
Exactly.
There's definitely power in just sharing your struggles and finding people that can relate to what you're going through. It seems like breaking free recognizes that we're not meant to go through these challenges alone.
Not at all. They emphasize that community and support are vital parts of the healing process.
Yeah.
And, they also acknowledge that sometimes faith alone isn't enough.
Yeah.
And that seeking professional help can be so crucial.
Right.
And they present that as a sign of strength, not weakness.
It's refreshing to see that they're advocating for a holistic approach
Yes.
to mental health,
Yeah.
Acknowledging the benefits of both faith and professional help.
It's not either.
Yes.
Recognizing that different approaches can work together.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really important message, especially within faith communities,
Right.
where there can sometimes be a stigma
Yeah.
associated with seeking therapy or medication. Now, speaking of community, breaking free also has a social media component, right?
Yes, they encourage listeners to connect with each other and share their own stories and tips.
Okay.
Using the hashtag #BreakingFreeHowManyWays podcast.
It's interesting, though. Do you think social media can truly be a place for deep connection and support when it comes to such personal struggles?
That's a good question.
I mean, isn't it often seen as a platform for just presenting a perfect, curated version of ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it raises some interesting questions.
Right.
Like, is sharing our vulnerabilities online actually helpful?
Yeah.
Or can it sometimes feel performative?
Right.
Can we really find genuine support through a hashtag?
It's something to think about. But I do appreciate that breaking free is at least trying to create a space
Yes.
for open dialogue and connection, even if it's through an unconventional platform like social media.
Right.
And of course, they also encourage listeners to subscribe to their podcast to continue learning and growing in their faith. It's their own little call to action.
Yeah.
But it's important for us to reiterate that we're simply exploring their message, not necessarily endorsing it.
Right. We're just diving into the content
Yes,
and letting our listeners draw their own conclusions.
absolutely.
Yeah.
We're all about presenting different perspectives and sparking thoughtful conversations.
Yes.
And speaking of sparking conversations, I think it's time we move beyond just summarizing breaking free and start digging into some of the deeper implications of their message.
Sounds good to me. There's a lot to unpack here, and I'm curious to see where this conversation takes us.
Me too.
It's fascinating how breaking free takes this whole idea of finding strength and faith and applies it to something as complex as mental health.
Yeah, it really is. And what I think is so interesting is how they acknowledge the mind, body, and spirit connection.
Yeah.
Like, they don't see them as separate things, but as parts of a whole. It's like they're saying that, to truly address anxiety and depression, we have to look at the whole picture.
Right. They talk about how anxiety and depression can impact us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It's not just about addressing the symptoms, but understanding how those symptoms connect to like a larger whole.
Right? It reminds me of like the research that shows how chronic stress can actually weaken your immune system,
Oh, wow.
or how mindfulness can actually improve both mental and physical well-being. It's all connected.
Yeah, breaking free is tapping into this idea that we need to care for ourselves on multiple levels.
Yeah, I think so too. And you know what else I like is that they challenge some common misconceptions about faith and mental health.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's not about just praying harder
Right.
or having more faith to make the problems disappear.
Exactly.
They're very clear that struggling with anxiety or depression isn't a sign of, like, weak faith.
Right.
In fact, they suggest that it's often in those moments of vulnerability
Right.
that we can actually draw closer to a higher power.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
It is. It's like, instead of seeing these struggles as failures,
Mm-hmm.
they're presented as opportunities for growth and connection.
Right. It's about recognizing that we don't have all the answers and that it's okay to lean on something bigger than ourselves. And I think that can be so helpful, especially in a culture that often emphasizes self-reliance.
Absolutely. Even though breaking free comes from a Christian perspective,
Yeah.
this idea of, like, finding strength and support, it resonates with people from so many different backgrounds.
Of course.
The need for connection and compassion,
Mm-hmm.
it's universal.
It is absolutely, whether it's through faith community or professional help,
Right.
we all need to find ways to, like, support ourselves and each other through those difficult times.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're not alone in this.
That's so important. And it's also important to remember that there's no single right way
Right.
to approach mental health.
Of course.
Different cultures and traditions
Mhm.
have their own unique ways of understanding and addressing these challenges.
Exactly what works for one person might not work for another.
Yeah.
We all have to find our own path.
Our own path to healing and well-being.
Healing and well-being.
It's about exploring different possibilities,
Yeah.
staying open-minded,
Hmm.
and finding what truly resonates with you.
And sometimes that path involves faith. Sometimes it involves therapy or medication. And sometimes it's a combination of all of those things.
It is breaking free seems to encourage that exploration.
Right.
They're not saying that faith is the only answer,
Yeah.
but rather that it can be a powerful source of strength alongside other forms of support.
It's about recognizing that there are many different paths to healing and that what matters most is finding what works best for you.
I think that's such an important message, especially when there can be so much pressure to follow a specific path
Right.
or to believe in a certain way.
Totally. Breaking free seems to be encouraging a more personalized approach to faith and well-being.
Yeah, I think so too. And, it's a reminder that the journey itself is valuable. It's about learning, growing, becoming more resilient along the way.
Right.
So we've talked a lot about, like, the broader ideas behind breaking free, but what about you personally? What resonated with you from this content?
Well, I think what really struck me was their emphasis on honesty and vulnerability.
Yeah.
They talk about how important it is to be honest with ourselves and with God about our struggles.
Yeah.
And that really resonated with me.
It is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
We often try to hide our imperfections
Oh, yeah.
and present this perfect facade to the world.
Mhm.
It's like we're afraid to let people see our true selves,
Totally.
especially when those selves are struggling.
Especially then.
And that fear of judgment, that shame,
Yeah.
can be so isolating.
It can be incredibly isolating.
But breaking free encourages us to let go of that fear.
Yeah.
They're saying it's okay to not be okay,
Yeah.
and that admitting our vulnerabilities is actually a strength, not a weakness.
It's about acknowledging that we're all human
Mm-hmm.
and that we all go through difficult times.
Yeah,
And it's in those moments of shared vulnerability
yeah.
that we can find true connection and support.
That's such a powerful message.
It is.
Especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with images of perfection.
Right.
It's easy to feel like we're not measuring up if we're not always happy and successful.
It's so true. Breaking free reminds us that those expectations are so unrealistic. They encourage us to embrace the messy, imperfect reality of life and to find beauty in the cracks and crevices,
Yeah.
in the moments of vulnerability and struggle.
And to remember that we're not alone in those moments.
Not at all.
It's such a beautiful message of hope and resilience.
Absolutely. And it's something we all need to hear. We
Yeah.
need to remind ourselves that it's okay to be human, to struggle, to need help,
Yeah.
and that there's strength and beauty in that shared human experience.
I think you hit on something really important there.
Oh, yeah.
It's not about denying the struggles,
Right.
but about finding ways to navigate them with grace, compassion, and support.
Exactly. And breaking free provides some really valuable insights into how faith can be a source of strength along that journey.
Yeah, but it's also important to remember that faith isn't the only path to healing.
Right.
There are many different ways to find support
Mm-hmm.
and to cultivate resilience in the face of challenges.
It's about finding what works best for you, whether that's faith therapy community or a combination of all of those things.
And it's about having the courage to be honest with ourselves and with others about what we're going through.
Yeah, because it's in those moments of honesty and vulnerability that we open ourselves up to true connection and healing.
I think that's the perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
we want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question.
Okay. Sounds intriguing.
We focus primarily on a Christian perspective today,
Right.
exploring how breaking free frames faith as a source of strength in dealing with anxiety and depression.
Yes, and we've uncovered some valuable insights along the way.
We have, but we want to hear from our listeners who may have different beliefs or experiences. How do you find strength and support when dealing with these challenges?
Right.
What resources, practices, or perspectives have helped you on your journey?
It's a question worth pondering for all of us.
It is.
Regardless of our backgrounds or beliefs.
Because ultimately, the journey to healing and well-being is a personal one.
It is, and it's a journey that deserves to be explored with curiosity, compassion, and an open mind.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive,
We have.
exploring how breaking free presents faith as a source of strength when you're dealing with anxiety and depression.
And we've seen how they kind of weave together these personal stories with like biblical teachings
Yeah.
and practical advice to create this really accessible and hopeful approach.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating to see how they connect these ancient practices like prayer and gratitude to modern research on well-being.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
But beyond the specific techniques, like what really stands out to me is their emphasis on like shifting our perspective.
You mean like how they encourage us to view our struggles as opportunities for growth?
Yeah.
Exactly. Like instead of getting bogged down by those challenges, they suggest we look for the potential for like transformation within them.
It's like they're saying that even like the toughest experiences can teach us valuable lessons and make us more resilient.
It reminds me of the whole concept of post-traumatic growth,
Oh, yeah.
where people actually find meaning and purpose in the aftermath of some really difficult events.
Right.
It's not about minimizing the pain, but it's about recognizing that even in those dark times, there's a chance for growth.
And breaking free seems to be saying that this growth can happen on multiple levels.
Yeah.
Spiritually, emotionally, even physically.
It's about recognizing that we're not static beings.
Right.
We're constantly evolving and learning and becoming more than we were before. And sometimes those challenges are what kind of push us to evolve.
It's a powerful reminder that our struggles don't define us,
Right.
but they can shape us, mold us, make us stronger.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
It takes the focus away from simply trying to like fix ourselves and it puts it on like embracing the journey.
Even the messy parts.
The messy parts.
And breaking free encourages us to find support and guidance along that journey,
yes.
whether it's through prayer community, professional help, or all of the above.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we don't have to go through this alone
Yeah,
and that asking for help is not a weakness,
right.
but it's a sign of strength and self-awareness.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's so important to reiterate that, while we've been exploring a specifically Christian perspective today,
Yeah.
the core message of, finding strength and resilience when you're facing challenges, it's something that really resonates across different beliefs and backgrounds.
Absolutely. We all face struggles in life,
We do.
and we all need to find ways to cope, to heal, and to grow.
And sometimes those experiences can lead us to some unexpected places
Yeah.
of strength and wisdom.
It's true.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep searching for those sources of strength and support that really resonate with you.
And remember, you're not alone in this journey. There is always help available, and there is always hope for healing and growth.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Breaking Free. We hope you found it insightful, and we encourage you to continue the conversation by sharing your own thoughts and experiences.
Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.